Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the meeting. Without further ado, let's start on the agenda. Apologies.
So we have apologies from councillors Howell, Wells and Welton this evening.
Thank you. Yes, just those three.
Yes, that's the only ones we have apologies from.
Item 2, response to questions arising.
Sorry, the minutes first.
Oh, apologies. Yes, minutes from previous meeting. Are there any issues on the minutes?
Thank you, Chair. It was just concerning my observation, apparently, on the alarming statistics surrounding dementia sufferers. It was actually twofold because the G.L. Hearn report also forecast overall a 95% increase in population aged 75 and over. So it was grim statistics on sort of both sides, really. So which I wanted to flag, but obviously no problem with the minutes, but it was twofold. Thank you.
Oh, yes. So, obviously, the minutes aren't necessarily a verbatim record, but are you happy with the minutes to continue as they are, or would you like me to add an amend to add that into them?
An amend at this stage, please. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, response to questions from previous questions.
Yeah. So on item 2 there, the response to questions arising from the previous meeting, obviously you have those there because there were some outstanding questions from last meeting which we were waiting on responses for. So those are there just for you to note, because obviously they came through after the meeting itself. So are there any questions on those there? There was one around finance performance and one around corporate plan targets. Are there any questions, or are you just happy to note those? Lovely, good, thank you.
Item 3, members' interests.
Is there any interest for this evening? No.
Thank you. Goodness, we're rattling through this. Item 4, notice of executive decisions.
So notice of key executive decisions obviously is published here. I understand that there is something that Councillor Wakeford would like to just update us on. So if you would just like to come forward, and whilst that is happening, it was just to let you know as well that I've been informed today that there will be an update on planning services being added onto this key decisions, which will go into the October cycle of meetings. But obviously that is from when this has been published up to now. So that's an amendment that's been added on. So it's just to update you on that. And then Councillor Wakeford, did you just...
There we go. It's going to have to be worth it now, isn't it? You have down on your notice document a quarterly Market Towns report in September's meeting. Those are reports, as you're well aware, because you've heard me inflict myself on you with enough of them, that we're delivering monthly. We're not delivering monthly, I'm relieved to tell you, quarterly. Because we feel that sort of helpful frequency, but there's no sort of first principles requirement to the rigidity of that. I happen, for personal reasons, due to be abroad at a family wedding in September. I was planning in September's meeting to be speaking to you virtually, which is doable, but having looked at, given it is early in the month, looked at paper deadlines over the summer and the most up-to-date point at which we'd be able to draft things for you, and considering developments in the scheme of which there'll be a fair few towards the end of the summer, the option I would be keen to float with the panel, a proposal, an informal proposal, as it were, is to push that back to October, which would enable me to be here in person rather than reliant on an internet connection. There is no particular reason why we would need to secure any delegations in September. We couldn't secure in October, so there's no impact on the project. It's literally for your information. I think there'll be more to update you on, might be of more interest to the panel at that point. And also, as you'll recall, we're intending a part 2 section to discuss, among other things, finances and the Old Falcon, and so to be with you in person might be more conducive to the sort of full discussion I think we're keen to have. I hope Councillor Jennings doesn't mind me mentioning I have floated this with the front bench of our opposition colleagues to check there wouldn't be a particular sort of concern, and my understanding is there isn't one, but you should feel free to add. So if the panel doesn't see any problem with that, then you can have an update in October as well as then the winter one in December. But I would not dream of wishing to look like I was seeking to evade your scrutiny. And if you want me to do that on Zoom in September, I'm happy with that too.
Councillor Corney.
Yeah, well, I can't speak for everybody, but I'm sure that's acceptable. I mean, the fact that these projects do take a long time, and I'm well aware of some of them. I'm obviously working with some of them, so. But I'm sure if we have any questions that are pressing before that, we can come to you, can't we? And I'm sure you'll answer, eloquently as well.
You know where to find me. Okay, on that basis then, I don't know if we can formally consider the document amended, but we will propose an amendment the next time it comes through the committee cycle. So thank you.
I'll get that amended next.
I think, well, certainly there are no other comments, and the rest of the committee is in agreement with that. I think that's fine. Thank you, Sam. Item 5, tenancy strategy. Pam, Sam.
Hi again from the other end of the room, and pleased to speak to you on what's obviously the most interesting matter coming before your panel and scrutiny this week. Certainly the highlight of mine. So this is a new tenancy strategy, an updated strategy for the council. We are required to have one of these. We have had one in the past. It expired nearly 10 years ago, but it is still extant. So we would argue the council has not been entirely without a strategy, but having an up-to-date tenancy strategy maximises the extent to which we're able to influence the approach of registered providers in their letting of tenancies to social tenants in the district. So this is a valuable tool that we've got, but as members will be aware, it is not an entirely concrete tool, to mix my metaphors. Because we do not have our own housing stock. That was transferred out a long time ago. So we cannot control, nor would we wish to control the registered providers, the RPs as they're known, but they are required to have regard to policies from us made under the terms of the Localism Act. So this is how we seek to influence how they approach what they do with tenants. I suppose primary change, the document is significantly different in structure to the old strategy dated 2013 to 15, but in substance, probably the key update here is around the use of fixed-term tenancies. So there was a national legislative aspiration back following the Localism Act in, 2011, to bring in greater use of tenancies in social housing that were for a fixed period, for example, 5 years, that people would then have to reapply for, depending on their eligibility, as opposed to a default of lifetime tenancies, which is how it's typically worked. That was very new as a legal concept when the council's strategy was produced. I think I said 2013 to 2015. I think it may have been 2012 to 2015. That would be more swiftly after the 2011 Localism Act. And so it was a new idea. The strategy did seek to encourage a measure of use of the fixed term tenancies. The basic reflection from experience over the last decade or so of our housing providers is that they don't add a tremendous amount of value, that in the vast majority of cases, people having to reapply to continue living in their homes continue to be eligible. And so the impact on freeing up housing stock, which obviously was the policy aspiration, has been fairly negligible, and the organisational costs and time in requiring people to reapply and going through processes and so on is significant, both for tenants, which has been unwelcome if it proves futile, as it almost always did in terms of the public policy aim, because it results in no change, but also it seems like it's been more of a distraction for the RPs than a value for them. And as I think all of us from our casework roles as counsellors, as well as our understanding of the broader landscape, I think are well aware that the RPs are fairly stretched for capacity as organisations, given their resourcing, given the pressures on them, and for all sorts of reasons well understand. So the change in this policy around that area is to revert to a default expectation of secure lifetime tenancies, save where there are good reasons otherwise. So we don't anticipate that having a significant detrimental value on availability of stock. To the contrary, we intend it to have a positive impact on the well-being of tenants, not being put through that sort of frequency of a reapplication, so they can live their lives without that worry about cut-offs, but also so that the RPs aren't required by our policy to spend their time and energies on things that aren't dealing with the concerns that our residents in social housing would wish them to be doing in other areas, be they maintenance backlogs or focusing on their efforts to expand additional housing or anything else. So that's the main area, really, I would signpost. We can talk you through other aspects of it if you wish. I would just flag on the specific language. I have had very helpful representation from your chair in advance to suggest that the use of the term social ladder is not terribly helpful or achieving quite what is meant in the document, which I fully agree with. I think that's a clumsy phrase, and I'm grateful to Councillor Gleader for pointing that out. So and unless there's any acute concern to the contrary, the version of this that we bring forward to Cabinet, subject to any other changes in light of comments and questions this evening, would just rephrase the social ladder reference slightly to mean the same thing, but without unintended implication. I don't think there's anything further Pam wished to add at this point, so how about we stop there and open to your questions and comments, please.
Thank you, Sam. Are there any? Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I would just like to push a little bit on that point that you've just discussed there, Councillor Wakeford. So I want to say that I absolutely support the principle that everyone should be able to have a safe and high quality home, as the report says, and the possibility of a long-term and stable home for the family to be settled in a sustainable community. And I do understand as well that many tenants will have circumstances which are unlikely to change in the short term, for example, a long-term disability. But I think for many, surely the circumstances which lead them to need social housing will be short-term. and it seems important to me that there should be some motivation for tenants to become self-sufficient and maybe to own their own homes and not to need to depend on subsidised rents where that's possible, particularly where we have finite resources under increasing pressure. So I just wanted to push back a little bit on this kind of default assumption, which is that the vast majority of tenants would be secure lifetime tenants, because that doesn't seem to me to motivate tenants whose circumstances may have changed for the better to actually own their own home, or to improve their circumstances, but actually maybe benefiting from subsidised rents for a lifetime longer than they need to. So I'm just interested to explore that point a little bit further and to understand what, for those who do have the possibility of changing their circumstances, what mechanisms would there be to kind of explore, in the same way as you would move off universal credit and other benefits. Surely it would be right to not depend on subsidised rents, but beyond that point. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I think the point is very well made. I mean, the short answer is there is no easy solution to the challenge you present of wishing to enable residents of social housing to live without the concerns you and I both made reference to, while ensuring housing stocks made best use of. I think the key point on which I flagged a policy change here is the government's attempted solution of fixed-term tenancies in the Localism Act. The experience in particular from engagement with our own RPs in this area. This isn't sort of an attempt to make a sort of broad brush national political sort of policy position for the council, but what has been found here is that it's simply not a tool that has assisted in addressing the problem you're describing in any meaningful way. If anything, it's been counterproductive. There are different approaches that housing associations and RPs in general have in the past and can take to working with tenants to give them opportunities to move on, give them incentives to, for example, move from a larger family house into a smaller one if at the point at which they entered social housing they had a need for a home of one size and they no longer do. And, which have been sort of experimented with to varying degrees of success. My understanding is in the current economic climate, our RPs locally don't appear to have meaningful budget to explore that further. But it is obviously a challenge relevant in all of the work RPs do, because they want to ensure best use of their accommodation as well. I don't know if you wanted to add anything in particular on that further, Pam. Thank you.
I think just to add on to what Councillor Wakeford has said, as part of our allocation process, if we do have a resident living in a large family home who is willing to release it to a smaller unit, then we do prioritise people giving up two bedrooms in addition to their need as sort of band A on our sort of housing register. So that's the highest priority on the housing register, so they would get a good chance of bidding for alternative suitable accommodation, and it would be a band B if they're only giving up one bedroom more than they need. In relation to sort of incentives, housing associations will contact their own tenants in relation to opportunities. So if people do have an aspiration, for example, to leave the rented sector into low-cost home ownership, there are mechanisms within housing associations to make that available to them. They're just treated sort of as internal transfers, and priority is given that way, because obviously we don't get every a vacant property, and especially if it's a shared ownership unit, a lot of the housing associations have a buyback option. So people that are the existing residents who are moving on, people are then able to purchase those properties at a percentage that they can afford. But I think the actual legislative backdrop hasn't, as Councillor Wakeford has said, hasn't produced the desired aims of the policy from what we can work out from our partners.
Councillor Corney.
Thank you. Yeah, not so much of a question really, just a little bit of a comment really. It's the one thing would be nice to see on there is but I don't think it's not within our gift, you know, and that's just how the HAs actually reacts when there's a problem. And I'm sure, you know, most of us have been around very any length of time will have had to deal with or try and help you know, some of our residents with HAs, and it's you know, sometimes it's quite shocking really, but like I say, sadly that's not within our gift. But so but then the only other comment I would sort of say is that for something that's, you know, to me this makes perfect sense, and this is, you know, this is common sense written down. I'm amazed it sort of bounced along as long as it did on the work programme to get to us. Yeah, if there's, you know, having not really seen the previous one because it wasn't, you know, it wouldn't have come over the desk. And you sort of saying, so there's not a massive amount of difference. I'm surprised it bounced along as long as it did, but it's in front of us now. So it's, and like I say, it seems common sense written down.
Pam.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back, Councillor Corney, on your first comment? One of the things that we're doing as part of our strategic housing function and in light of the recent corporate plan is looking at our housing associations across the district. We want to almost get a benchmark of what they are actually doing for their residents. Not just from a housing condition perspective per se, but also things like the climate agenda. Some of the registered providers that have fed back to us on this strategy have actually said that they're really interested in finding out information from the council about climate strategy, for example, and what options could be open to them. So, but one of the things that we are looking at doing is having an understanding of how the housing associations are actually meeting their requirements to their residents. At this present moment in time, I wouldn't be able to say to you that any of them are meeting their targets, for example, and quite possibly some, you know, a high percentage of them would be. But we're getting that analysis so that we can at least see what they should be delivering and see how they're actually achieving against that, and see if there is anything that the council can do in its enabling function to work and support the RPs in that, because I'm conscious that some of the feedback we get is about, you know, poor conditions and things like that. So we do have those options available, and later in the year we are hoping to host a registered provider forum, and one of the areas that I would hope that we get addressed is that exact point that you've just made.
Sam, did you want?
Thank you. That's really helpful, Pam. I think, yes, one of the temptations in a strategy like this is to oblige as much specificity from the RPs as we possibly can. Unfortunately, having taken wise counsel on that one, there is, of course, a balance, because the RPs need to have regard to what we've set out. If we set out things that are at risk of being deemed unreasonable, then we end up not needing to be had regard to at all, essentially. So it has been challenging to resist the temptation to be a little more prescriptive in here, but our judgment is that this strikes the right balance between ensuring that this is had regard to. I mean, critically, you know, 2.6, just for absolute avoidance of doubt, lays out our expectation that residents live in high quality, well-maintained and safe homes, and that tenants are empowered and listened to in relation to their tenancies and services provided to them. Now, that's not complicated. That's not many many words. I suspect some round the table may feel that even that as an aspiration would be, if we could be confident of meeting that in general terms, we'd be making progress in some cases. So I absolutely take what Councillor Corney says on that point. Just to tackle directly the point as well about moving around on the work plan, the key decisions calendar, if that's the term. As Pam has flagged, in part we were wishing to ensure that we had the feedback from RPs on this, so that it's as useful as possible, so that we can strike that balance, basically to go as far as possible with this while ensuring it is still still robust, not unreasonable, ensure that it is had regard to. I think insofar as there was a faintly political challenge there, the faintly political response would be to share my surprise that we haven't had one since 2015, given the importance of this, that it wasn't on the work plan sooner, much sooner. But we are here. We've been prioritising, as you've seen, other aspects from the strategic housing aspect of what Pam and her team do. That you've had a couple of papers already from us as well, given the state of local government funding and our resourcing levels. Pam's team, as well as running strategic housing, is also running regeneration, and you hear quite a bit from the two of us on that as well. I wish that we had, I wish we had two Pams to run both of them. I wish we had teams to run each of those, and we were staffed to a level that we are not, and the strained position of council funding is clearly of relevance to another item on your agenda later this week. But I'll probably stop there, Councillor Corney. But I agree with you in substance that yes, there is lots I wish we could say that we can't necessarily control.
Thank you, Sam. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Pam, for a very detailed report. The one thing I would quite have liked to have seen was if we could have had where the changes were from the previous policy. That would have helped me see what had actually changed and made the whole thing read easier. So that's just one comment that I would like to see going forward. And then coming back to Councillor Wakeford's just comment about, oh, well, we should have done this earlier. Well, you've looked at it after 8 years, not 10. If my calculations are correct. Under this policy, you are not expected to look at it again for another 10 years. So I don't see that you can really criticise the previous administration when you are not looking to do it any earlier than the previous one. So I'd just like to make that point very clear, because it's not fair from what you have said. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. So the previous tenancy strategy was the tenancy strategy 2012 to 2015. So I believe I said nearly a decade, and that is absolutely right and fair to flag. I'm rounding nearly a decade, 8 years. Yes, I made that point reasonably softly, and only in response to what I perceived, I hope not inaccurately, as a gentle criticism around the item moving on the work plan. So I trust that was a gentle response. I say gently in part because if we are content with what's in here, this may stand for a decade in terms of the language we're using. We don't intend it to need to be repeated, reworked frequently, but the concern, given we are legally obliged to have a policy, that a strategy finished in 2015 by its own statement. I think that's the gap I was referring to. But again, as I alluded to, we would at the beginning as well in introduction, in interests of fairness, reflecting inevitably that the capacity challenges aren't unique to our administration, of course, compared to what we'd wish to be able to do, that our position would have been to expect RPs to have regard to it anyway, I'm sure, but this having an up-to-date policy that is explicit about remaining in date gives it more weight.
Thank you, Councillor Wakefield. If I might actually just ask a question myself. Thank you for the information from both of you, particularly Pam, on the update. Can you tell me a little bit more about how we engaged with the RPs to actually inform this document? Please, thank you.
So one of the things, Chair, that we undertook was to look at the current tenancy policies of the RPs that are the most active RPs in our district. Obviously, we've got several RPs that have stock within the district, but we've had a look at the sort of the main stockholders, including Places for People, which is obviously our first port of call, so that we would know that the type of policy that they are adopting would, into some respect, align with what our thoughts were. And I think part of that has enabled us to have that sort of dialogue so that we know that the removal of the fixed term tenancy specifically is something that in practice most RPs have actually undertaken. That said, there will still be certain occasions where councillors may observe properties advertised on a fixed term tenancy basis, and that can be just on an individual scheme for some reason on viability, and to go back to earlier points about the flexibility for people in relation to tenure, but also that it might be because they're larger homes or they're highly adapted properties, and so that the housing association wants to keep that flexibility to enable the best use of those resources going forward. But yes, so we've spoken and we've consulted with them, and then we shared with them the draft strategy before. Obviously, you've seen it this evening, so that we could get that feedback quite quickly, so that we know that we're in the right sort of domain really for them.
Thank you, Pam. It's quite helpful to know that we've actually been engaging with the external community, so that we're actually aligned. I mean, I think Councillor Gardner makes quite a valid point in terms of, well, as you all have actually, in terms of the 10-year strategy. Is 10 years sufficient, or it seems rather long to me? But perhaps you'd like to just.
I think for me that is not an uncommon length of time, because although the Localism Act brought those changes in 2011, this sort of area of sort of operation doesn't change that often. That said, there is a current bill going through which might end up changing what we're doing. But I think, to pick up the earlier point, what I would say as an officer is that if we give ourselves 10 years, if we revisit it earlier, then we're not out of the strategy's length. It gives us that flexibility, but it also means that we're not putting pressure on resources to adopt a new strategy when there's nothing wrong with the current one. So that was my rationale for the 10 years.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Pam. Are there any other questions? Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, in the introduction section 1.2, it's luminous without the O, please. I also wanted to echo the Chair's sentiments concerning the duration of the policy. That I think we need to be prepared to be flexible as things develop, and probably the demand for this type of housing grows. And finally, I just wanted to ask you about the consultees, the companies. Are they all providers within our district?
To come back on that last point, yes, they are. They've all got housing in our district.
Yeah, I have little value to add to what Pam responded in answer to an earlier question, really. You know, I like the implication of the question that you have confidence. I'll remain the executive member responsible for strategic housing for the next 10 years in terms of the forward plan, because plainly that is not an expectation or confidence I think any of us have. So we don't know what decisions are going to be needed in future. As Pam has said, it gives us the option. It gives us that backstop. But I would fully expect, for as long as our administration lasts, we would indeed be keeping that need for update under review. Doesn't matter if we change the policy earlier than its stated length, but if we change the policy further away than its stated length, then we risk the impression of invalidity and it being ignored in the meantime. And as Pam has said, we may well need to revisit this in light of legislative change in the much nearer future within the length of time that might be realistic for us to plan, as in within the length of this administration. But we shall see.
Thank you, Sam. Are there any other questions? Okay. Are we happy to put forward to Cabinet the paper as is with the recommendations about regular review and all the other comments? Okay, thank you. Can I have a show of hands for that? Thank you. Thank you. On to item 6, which is overview and scrutiny work programme.
So just on the work programme, there is an update which I was hoping would have come out in the last couple of days, but just a few other things have had to take priority. On the review of external appointments to outside organisations project, there will be some communication coming round very imminently on just how that's going to work, and that's going to be a regular set of reporting into the panels of that, and that's going forward. So that will be going out to all councillors who are on those panels and boards to update them on what they will need to do in order to sort of keep in touch with both officers and overview and scrutiny. And then we will regularly review how that is working within that working group. So I think we're proposing to set a meeting for later in the year so that we can see how that's coming together, and that can obviously be reviewed as and when needed to see, but we need to give that some time to settle in that new process so that we can actually have something to review. So that's on that one. Was there anything that anybody wanted to suggest to add to the work programme as part of the thing at the moment, or not? Or
I think there's some recommendation from Councillor from Sally Howell. Did she make some recommendation on business? Oh, okay.
Actually, yes,
Apologies.
yes.
I thought I'd seen something from her on that.
Oh,
Certainly something in terms of business. However, fine, no, anything
not at the
else.
moment.
But obviously we look forward to that.
I mean, certainly as this programme is, it doesn't have to be something that you bring up in this meeting. It's not that it can only be discussed in this meeting. If there's something that you come across in the next week or so that you think, oh, I should have mentioned that in the work programme, you know, you're obviously welcome to email that to us and we can add it on in between time. It doesn't have to wait till the September meeting to be added in. We can obviously do that and sort of start to progress things in between meetings. It doesn't have to wait for the meeting.
Are there any other questions on that or comments? Okay. Well, it's the end of the meeting. Now, I'm not going to be seeing you until September, and you're going to have a lovely holiday. However, I do look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. That'll be excellent. And I'll see you then. Thank you again for your time, as ever. Thank you.
Have a nice holiday, but don't forget you still owe a round of coffees.